maybe she came in illegally, maybe. Let me tell you one thing. She has got it so documented, so she's going to have a little news conference over the next couple of weeks. That's good. That's good. I love it. I love it. They said, Melania Trump may have come into our country illegally, and how would that be for Donald Trump to be talking? Here's the only problem. She came in totally legally. I mean, so that's what I'm going to say. All right, but you'll see it in a little while. I said to her, no, let it simmer for a little while. Let them go wild. Let it simmer.
In late 2025, a deadline arrived that the American public had been waiting for years. The Epstein bomb was supposed to drop, revealing every name and every secret hidden in the vault of the most notorious financier in modern history. But as the clock struck midnight on December 19th, the documents that emerged were not what was promised. Tonight, we look at the paper trail, the redacted flight logs, and the data that suggests a strategic effort to keep the truth in the shadows. Let's play this clip.
This is an update about my lawsuit against the First Lady of the United States. I think she's running from us. By suing her, we have the right to subpoena her and her husband and their friends and to ask all concerned about their relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. We have tried to serve her lawyer in Florida. He has absolutely refused to take service of our lawsuit. We've sent a process server to Trump Tower, where we understand she lives, not in the White House, but in Trump Tower. And that process server, who seemed perfectly familiar with serving people in Trump Tower, a lot of dubious people there. When the server found out that it was the First Lady, they panicked, they refused to do it. We got another server to go, and this was just yesterday. They arrived at Trump Tower. They were prevented from getting in by security. Security told them that they would take any papers and throw them in the garbage. But they did confirm that Melania Trump lives in Trump Tower. So this is a kind of historical point. The First Lady of the United States does not live in the White House. She lives in Trump Tower. We will now go into court as early as tomorrow.
Good evening. We begin tonight with a question that goes to the very heart of democratic accountability. Can the public truly evaluate their leaders if those leaders have the power to control the narrative? For years, the so-called Epstein files have existed as a sort of dark cloud over the American political landscape. A massive body of evidence, over 300 gigabytes of data, detailing the activities of Jeffrey Epstein and his high-profile associates. During his 2024 campaign, Donald Trump frequently promised to release these files, telling interviewers he would have no problem making the client list public. He positioned himself as the champion of transparency, the one man willing to expose the swamp monsters of the previous era. But as 2025 progressed, the rhetoric from the White House shifted in a way that left both his critics and his most ardent supporters questioning what was really in those files. The most serious development arrived on December 19, 2025. This was the deadline set by the Epstein Files Transparency Act, a piece of legislation that passed both the House and the Senate with nearly unanimous support. The law required the Department of Justice to release the full, unredacted records of the Epstein investigation. However, when the deadline arrived, the Department of Justice released only a portion of the files. Even more troubling were the reports from news organizations like the Associated Press, which noted that at least 16 files disappeared from the public webpage shortly after they were posted, without any explanation from the government. This follow-through, or lack thereof, created an immediate crisis of transparency. The documents that were released were heavily redacted, with officials citing the need to protect politically exposed individuals. Despite the president's earlier promises, the Epstein bomb felt less like an explosion and more like a carefully managed release of information we already knew. Why does this matter so much? It matters because the files that did make it out suggest that the relationship between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein was far more extensive than the public had been led to believe. For years, the official line was that they were friendly for a time, but had a falling out in 2004. But new emails released by the House Oversight Committee in November 2025 paint a different picture. In one thread from 2018, Jeffrey Epstein himself wrote, "I am the one able to take him down," and claimed he knew exactly how dirty Donald is. Another email from 2011 suggested that Trump was the dog that hasn't barked because he had spent hours at Epstein's house with a victim. These aren't just rumors. They are documents recovered from the Epstein estate and provided to Congress. The urgency here is not just about the past. It is about the present use of government power. Throughout 2025, the Department of Justice, led by Attorney General Pam Bondi, appeared to walk a fine line between fulfilling a public mandate and protecting the president. In February, Bondi told reporters the Epstein client list was sitting on her desk for review. By July, the DOJ issued a formal memo stating that no such list actually existed. This reversal sparked outrage across the political spectrum, with even right-wing influencers and activists expressing deep skepticism. Senator Dick Durbin later revealed that FBI personnel were reportedly instructed to flag any records in the massive cache that mentioned Donald Trump. This suggests that while the public was being told there was nothing to see, the government was working behind the scenes to identify every mention of the sitting president in the Epstein files.
Melania's lawyers sent me letters saying they're going to sue me for $1 billion. My response to that was, please do. In court, I would have the right to, number one, depose the person that's suing me, and that would be the individual Melania Trump. And I would have the right to subpoena and depose and seek discovery from every single person in their circle that would or potentially have knowledge about the genesis of the relationship between Donald Trump and Melania and their relationship with Jeffrey.
We have to look at how this fits into a larger pattern of communication. To understand the story of 2025, you have to understand the Roman concept of bread and circuses. This is the idea that a leader can stay in power and evade accountability by providing the public with enough distraction and spectacle to keep them from focusing on substantive scandals. In a groundbreaking study published in November 2025, researcher Andrew J. Peterson investigated whether this was happening in real time. Peterson looked at Donald Trump's posts on Truth Social during the heights of the Epstein scandal. He found something remarkable. Whenever attention to the Epstein files spiked on Fox News, the novelty of the president's social media posts increased significantly within 2 to 3 days. In other words, when the Epstein news got too loud, the president would suddenly introduce a fresh, provocative, or unusual topic to pull the media's focus away. This isn't just a theory. Peterson's data shows a statistical link. When Fox News mentioned Epstein more often, the president would pivot to things like accusing former President Obama of treason with an AI-generated video, or musing about revoking the citizenship of Rosie O'Donnell. He even announced a massive lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal for reporting on a birthday card he supposedly sent to Epstein. The research suggests these weren't random outbursts. They were strategic diversions designed to dilute, redirect, or crowd out damaging news. The study found that this novelty response was specific to Epstein coverage. It didn't happen when the media was talking about unrelated things like Taylor Swift or college basketball. This tells us that the White House was monitoring the information environment of its base very closely and reacting to threats in real time. As these diversions were playing out on Truth Social, the legal battle over the files moved into the halls of Congress. A populist faction within the Republican Party, led by Representative Thomas Massie, broke with the White House to demand a full release of the documents. Massie launched a discharge petition to force a vote, a move that the administration reportedly viewed as a very hostile act. For a while, the House leadership managed to stall this movement, with Speaker Mike Johnson even calling an early recess in July to avoid a floor vote. But the pressure from survivors and the public became too great. By November, the House and Senate finally passed the Transparency Act, forcing the president's hand. Even after the law was passed, the revelations continued to leak out. In December 2025, just before the final deadline, a newly released batch of files included an email from a senior U.S. attorney stating that Donald Trump had traveled on Epstein's private jet many more times than previously reported. The flight records showed at least 8 trips between 1993 and 1996. On 4 of those flights, Ghislaine Maxwell was also present. On one flight in 1993, the only passengers listed were Epstein, Trump, and a then 20-year-old woman whose name was redacted. While the DOJ has been quick to label some of these claims as unfounded or sensationalist, the records themselves come from the government's own investigative files. At the same time, the legal drama expanded to include First Lady Melania Trump. Author Michael Wolff, a former biographer of the president, claimed in a lawsuit that Melania Trump threatened him with $1 billion legal action to stop him from publishing details about her own connection to the Epstein circle. Wolff's lawsuit alleges that the Trumps have made a practice of threatening those who speak against them to create a climate of fear. In a surprising turn, Melania Trump's legal threats backfired. Wolff countersued, which gave him the right to seek discovery, meaning he can now try to subpoena the president and the First Lady to testify under oath about Epstein. According to Wolff, the First Lady has been evading service from process servers, moving between Trump Tower and Florida to avoid being officially notified of the lawsuit. This story is not just about a scandal from 20 years ago. It is about how power is exercised in the modern era. It is about the use of the Department of Justice to redact names, the use of social media to distract the public, and the use of the legal system to silence critics. When we look at the timeline of 2025, we see a recurring pattern. Public pressure builds for the truth. The administration promises transparency, but the actual results are filtered, delayed, and redacted. The survivors of Epstein's crimes, who have waited decades for accountability, spoke out at the U.S. Capitol in September, demanding that the full files be released without any more botched handling or bluffs. The documents we have seen so far provide a glimpse into a world of high-level connections that were shielded for years. We know from the released files that Epstein maintained regular contact with a vast network of celebrities, financiers, and politicians. We know that even after his 2019 death, the fight over his records has remained one of the most contentious issues in Washington. And we know that as long as the government maintains the power to redact the most important names, the public's ability to hold its leaders accountable remains compromised. This leads us back to the Peterson study and the idea of the strategic diversion. If a leader can successfully pull media attention toward fresh, controversial topics every time a substantive investigation gains traction, then the media becomes a tool for the leader rather than a check on them. Peterson's research suggests that Truth Social serves as the primary broadcast channel to seed these distracting narratives, which are then amplified by allied media outlets like Fox News. This creates an information loop that makes it very difficult for the public to focus on a single damaging story for long enough to demand real change. As we look toward 2026, the battle over the remaining Epstein files continues. The House Oversight Committee has already released tens of thousands of pages, but many of the most sensitive details remain under lock and key. The Department of Justice has been criticized by lawmakers from both parties for its disingenuous explanations regarding the redactions. Meanwhile, the Michael Wolff lawsuit threatens to bring the president and the First Lady into a courtroom to answer the very questions the government has tried to avoid. We are seeing a collision between the old way of managing scandals through silence and legal threats, and the new reality of the digital age where documents can be leaked and data can be analyzed to show the mechanics of a cover-up. The Epstein files are more than just a list of names. They are a test of whether our institutions are strong enough to handle the truth, even when that truth involves the people at the very top. The story of the Epstein files in 2025 is a story of a public that demanded transparency and a government that provided a redacted version of reality. It is a story of documented flight logs showing a long-term friendship and emails suggesting a deep knowledge of criminal conduct. And it is a story of how a circus of social media posts can be used to keep the public from seeing what is right in front of them. Tonight, we have laid out the facts as they are recorded in the documents, the research, and the court filings. We have seen the flight records, the Epstein emails, and the statistical data on presidential diversions. These are not opinions. They are the documented consequences of a relationship that has spanned decades and a scandal that continues to shape our political life. The question that remains is whether the American people will eventually see the rest of the files, or if the redactions will remain the final word on the Epstein legacy. The investigation into these files has revealed a deep-seated frustration within the Justice Department itself. Reports surfaced in late 2025 of lawyers and counterintelligence specialists feeling pressured by unclear instructions and arbitrary deadlines as they raced to redact information. This internal friction suggests that the process of managing the Epstein release was not a routine administrative task, but a high-stakes political operation. When the government misses its own legal deadlines and files disappear from public websites, it erodes the trust that is necessary for a functioning democracy. As the year drew to a close, the focus shifted to the Take Down Act, a piece of legislation championed by Melania Trump that would outlaw the distribution of non-consensual intimate imagery. While this was framed as a positive step for child safety, some critics wondered if it was another attempt to create legal loopholes that could be used to suppress information. The irony was not lost on observers that the First Lady was promoting a law about image-based abuse, while her own husband's history was being scrutinized through the lens of a notorious sex trafficker. We have to consider the long-form narrative here. This isn't just about one set of files. It's about the erosion of the boundary between campaigning and governing, what theorists call the permanent campaign. In this world, every news cycle is a battleground, and every scandal is an opportunity for a counterattack. The always-on circus of provocative communication is not a bug in the system. It is a feature designed to ensure that no single narrative ever becomes too damaging. But the documents don't lie. The 200 victims identified by the DOJ, the thousands of pages released by Congress, and the flight logs that show the president on Epstein's jet at least 8 times, these are part of the permanent record now. They provide a baseline of facts that no amount of social media novelty can completely erase. The challenge for the public is to stay focused on these facts, even when the circus is at its loudest. The survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes have made it clear that they are not going away. They have vowed to compile their own client list if the government continues to stall. Their quest for justice is a reminder that behind every redacted name in these files is a real person who was harmed. For them, the Epstein files are not a political game or a tool for diversion. They are the key to a lifetime of unanswered questions. As we conclude, we reflect on the state of the Epstein bomb at the end of 2025. The bomb has certainly gone off, but the smoke has not yet cleared. We have seen enough to know that the original promises of total transparency were not met. We have seen the statistical evidence that the administration used diversionary tactics to manage the fallout. And we have seen that the legal battles over these secrets are only just beginning. The documents released on December 19th were heavily redacted, but they were still a victory for those who fought for the Transparency Act. They proved that even a sitting president cannot completely stop the momentum of a public that demands to know the truth. But as the Associated Press noted, the disappearance of files from the DOJ website suggests that the fight for that truth is far from over. We will continue to follow the paper trail. We will continue to monitor the court cases and the congressional releases. And we will continue to bring you the facts, however many redactions they might have. The Epstein files are a mirror held up to our political system, and what we see in that mirror is something we must all grapple with as citizens. In the final analysis, the story of the Epstein files is about the limits of power. It is about whether a leader can truly flood the zone with enough distractions to make a scandal disappear. The data from 2025 suggests that while those tactics might work in the short run, the documents have a way of eventually finding the light. The truth about the relationship between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein is still being written, one unredacted page at a time. For years, the public was told that the relationship ended in 2004 over a real estate dispute. But the 2025 files show that Epstein was still obsessed with Trump as late as 2018, claiming he had the power to take him down. They show that Trump's name appeared over 1,000 times in the documents provided by the Epstein estate, and they show that the government went to extraordinary lengths to flag and redact those mentions. As we move into a new year, the quest for accountability continues. The survivors, the whistleblowers, and the researchers like Andrew Peterson have all contributed to a clearer picture of how power was used to manage this scandal. The Epstein bomb may have been partially diffused by redactions, but the facts that have already emerged are enough to change the narrative forever. We are left with a final thought on the nature of transparency. Real transparency is not a document dump of information the public already knows. It is the release of the information that power tries the hardest to hide. The struggle over the Epstein files in 2025 was a struggle over that very principle. And while the government may have kept many names in the shadows, the light is starting to reach the corners of this story that were once thought to be permanently dark. Thank you for joining us tonight. We will be here to bring you the next chapter of this story as it unfolds. In a world of circuses and diversions, the truth is the only thing that can truly set the record straight. Good night. Imagine a giant multi-ring circus performance designed to keep your eyes moving from one spectacular act to the next, while behind the curtain a very different and much more serious conversation is taking place that you aren't supposed to hear. That's the strategic diversion in action.